us today to discuss the findings and recommendations of what is our third Mekong-U.S. Partnership Policy Dialogue. We're going to have a lot of fun today because we've got a great group of folks that are queued up to have a discussion with all of you that are joining us online. These Track 1.5 dialogues, I should just say by way of introduction, are a series of 7 different conferences that are taking place starting last year in 2001 and continuing into next year in 2023. This third dialogue was, I believe, Brian Eiler, the last of our virtual dialogues, and we will be going in person. And we're so excited that our team will be back on the ground in region after a COVID pause. I should also say that we're really grateful to the U.S. Department of State's Mekong-U.S. partnership for their financial support in convening these discussions. As I said, this is the third dialogue that we will discuss today. It was focused on the issue of connectivity, and it convened more than 100 people from 5 lower Mekong countries, as well as the United States and other development partners from around the world. As you'll hear, we took a deep dive in those discussions into the challenges related to economic, to human, digital, and environmental connectivity needs. It was really, as I hope you will deduce from the discussion here today, an enlightening discussion then, and we're really eager to share some of the findings of those discussions with you now. In order to set the stage, though, we have 2 individuals who have really quite graciously agreed to help us frame the discussion. I'm going to introduce them sequentially here before I introduce you to our Master of Aller. Dr. Jung Pak is, as this audience knows well, the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Multilateral Affairs and for China Global Issues. Because she is an overachiever, she also serves as the Deputy Special Representative for the DPRK. I'm not exactly sure when this woman sleeps, but she is nonetheless able to fit us in. Thank you so much, Dr. Pak. I won't belabor your rather remarkable resume, which has included service both in and out of government, but instead, Dr. Pak, I will simply invite participants to review your resume on our website. I will thank you for being here and turn the floor over to you, ma'am, Dr. Pak.
Brian, thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Thank you to the Stimson Center for having me here today. Thank you to all of you for the excellent partnership and work that Stimson does in Southeast Asia. The Mekong-U.S. Partnership Track 1.5 Dialogue and the Mekong Dam Monitor are just two of the examples of the most groundbreaking work of you and your team. I'm excited to support the launch of this report on connectivity in the Mekong. As the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State that oversees the Mekong-U.S. Partnership, or the MUSP, I'm well aware of the importance of connectivity. As the COVID pandemic has reminded us, we must work together on issues that transcend borders. So let me talk about in 3 buckets of things that we're looking at, of course. On people-to-people ties, sustainable agriculture, scientific innovation, and proper management of the Mekong River and its surrounding ecosystems are all important areas for transboundary cooperation. As this report highlights, that cooperation begins with fostering people-to-people connections. For example, I'm happy to announce that under the MUSP's Young Scientist Program, about 30 young scientists in the Mekong will gather together in Ho Chi Minh City this summer to work together on developing nature-based solutions to agricultural issues. At the end of the week, there will be a pitch competition, and the winning proposal will receive $15,000 in startup funds. Through these young scientists and the MUSP, an innovative new technology will receive the resources to become a reality and start solving problems in a manner that stewards and leverages natural processes. That is the power of people-to-people connections. The U.S. Indo-Pacific strategy is committed to the promotion of our shared values, prosperity, and security. Our vision for the Indo-Pacific lays out what many of us already understand. the stability ensured by free, predictable, and transparent governments, and the security promoted through an open and rules-based order have the potential to unlock trillions of dollars of private sector investment in the region. And that means an unmistakable boost in opportunity and prosperity. Economic connectivity is essential to that shared prosperity. Last month in Tokyo, President Biden and the Indo-Pacific leaders launched the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework, or IPEF. IPEF builds on President Biden's focus on workers and the middle class to approach economic issues and trade through the lens of working together to create an economy that is connected, resilient, clean, and fair. IPEF will advance durable and broad-based economic growth by recorded.
We'll just give a second here to reestablish connection.
There we go. So I'm going to just hit back on IPEF, just go back a couple of seconds then. The IPEF builds on President Biden's focus on workers in the middle class to approach economic issues, and will advance durable and broad-based economic growth by building upon high standard trade and investment commitments for labor, the environment, and the digital economy. In fact, it addresses several of the priorities discussed in this report, for example, digital connectivity. We are working to secure IPEF commitments on standards to promote secure and reliable internet through partner countries. We were pleased to launch IPEF with an initial strong, diverse group of 13 Indo-Pacific partners, including 7 states from ASEAN. As the president said at the launch, IPEF is intended to be open and inclusive to others who wish to join if they share the values of IPEF and work to achieve those goals. Finally, multilateral and overlapping institutions allow us to connect on a range of levels. As we saw at the US-ASEAN Special Summit last month, including in ASEAN Chargé d'Affaires Kate Rebels' remarks at the pre-summit event addressing connectivity in the Mekong, a more connected Mekong under the MUSP supports a more connected ASEAN and vice versa. By enabling various multilateral institutions and agreements like the MUSP, IPEF, and ASEAN to work together, we encourage better connectivity that sets the region up for success. I'm excited to see the new and innovative ways that organizations like the Stimson Center and programs like the Track 1.5 policy dialogues will bring people together in the coming months and years. I have no doubt that the products of these collaborations will be instrumental in the bright future ahead. Thank you so much.
Dr. Pak, thank you so much, not just for your kind words, but also for your just deep personal commitment to the region as well. We're so grateful to have you there at the State Department. Ambassador Keo Chea is, of course, Ambassador of Cambodia to the United States. He also serves as an advisor to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs on ASEAN issues. He has had a long and distinguished career of public service around the world on behalf of his government. Likewise, you can read all about his own background on our website, and I really encourage you to do so. Ambassador, I should note that our next dialogue will be hosted in your country. We're looking forward to being in Phnom Penh. I'm really grateful to you for being here, and Ambassador, I give you the virtual dais, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Brian, for giving the floor. First of all, allow me to express my thanks to you and Dr. Jung, Deputy Assistant Secretary, Mr. Yan Nong Ok, founder of the TB, Mr. Stephanie Fitchers. First of all, I would like to express my sincere thanks to Stimson Center for the invitation extended to me to deliver these short remarks. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, Allow me to circle back with appreciation that the Lower Mekong Initiative alumni from the fiscal year 2009 and 2021, the U.S. government provided over $4.3 billion in bilateral and regional grants assistance to the 5 Mekong partners countries, such as health program, economic growth, peace and security, human rights and governance, education and social services, and humanitarian assistance. Building on the success of LMI, the 5 Mekong partner countries and the United States launched the Mekong-U.S. partnership as a strategic forum for cooperations. On 20th December 2029, at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Cambodia, His Excellency, the Foreign Minister of Cambodia, presided over the celebration of the 10-year anniversary of the LMI and made a keynote address on the achievement of the future and the future directions. The event was organized jointly with the Embassy of the U.S. in Phnom Penh and participated by ambassador and representative of the LMI member countries at the 5 countries and representative from relevant ministries and institutions, educational institutions and think tank, as well as civil society organizations. In the second Mekong-U.S. ministerial meeting, co-chaired virtually by His Excellency Prak Sokhonn, Foreign Minister of Cambodia, and Secretary of State Blinken, held in August last year, which adopted the plan of action of 2021 to 2023, significantly focusing on strengthening connectivities, economic integration, good governance, and narrowing the development gap in the sub-region through 4 priority areas of cooperation, namely economic connectivities, sustainable water resources management, natural resources management, conservation and environmental protection. Third, the non-traditional security, and fourth, the human resource development. The foreign minister of the Mekong partners thanked the U.S. for pledging another $52 million US in assistance to the Mekong country. In terms of economic and trade, the U.S. exports around $26 billion in goods and services to the sub-regions and import around $90 billion back from the sub-regions. However, to maximize the huge potential of the Mekong regions, which has a collective population of 240 million people, 40% of whom are the young labor forces below 25 years old. In this regard, Cambodia is hoping to see more private sectors investments in tourism, small and medium enterprise, and other priority sectors to boost economic growth during and after the pandemic. In terms of women empowerment and gender equality, Cambodia welcomed the establishment of the Gender Equality Policy series, which focus on first, women's economic empowerment with an emphasis on the post-COVID recovery and the climate crisis. Second, on women, peace and security, which focus on women leaderships. And third, preventing and responding to the gender-based violence. Cambodia, through the Ministry of Women's Affairs, is ready to collaborate with the U.S. and other Mekong countries to work on this goal. In terms of energy security and its indispensable role in economic development, and the MUSP is in a privileged and advantageous position with the existing Japan-U.S. Mekong power partnership Cambodia stands ready to cooperate with the U.S. and Japan in advancing the power sector in the region. Gentlemen, Excellencies, I would like to conclude my remarks by expressing sincere appreciation to the Stimson Center International Union for the Conservation of Nature and the Department of State, as well as experts from various sectors, for their collective efforts to dedicate to this summary report launched by the Mekong-U.S. partnerships. I am confident that this report will produce fruitful reference for Cambodia as well as for all the 5 Mekong partners countries. Thank you.
Ambassador, thank you again for those remarks and for your time here in joining us today. So look, with that by way of introduction, my only responsibility is to introduce you all to a man that really needs no introduction. Brian Eiler is a senior fellow and director of our Southeast Asia program here at the Stimson Center. He is the mastermind not only behind these dialogues, but is also our master of ceremonies today. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Brian Eiler.
Thank you, Brian. Thanks for joining to kick off the report launch of this 3rd Mekong-U.S. Partnership Track 1.5 Policy Dialogue Summary Report. And I want to extend a big thanks to Das Pak and Ambassador Keo for joining us to kick things off. And just to echo on to Ambassador Keo's remarks that he hopes that this report can produce fruitful results for the Mekong-U.S. partnership, for the countries of the Mekong in the United States and development partners, as well as government and non-government stakeholders there. I bet many of you are wondering what we do when we hold these Track 1.5 policy dialogues. So let me introduce this very quickly. As Brian noted, for this last Track 1.5 policy dialogue, we convened over 100 stakeholders, government and non-government, to have a discussion about connectivity. And when we get together, we explore different sub-themes, and those sub-themes today are represented by our panelists, who I'll introduce very soon. Our goal of having these dialogues, well, we have many goals, but one output, or what we want to get out of this, is a set of policy recommendations, not just for the U.S. government, for good policy in the Mekong, but also for stakeholders in the region and government stakeholders in the region to help guide their own policy-making processes. So we get together and we talk about needs. We're in a protected Chatham House rules setting where people can feel comfortable speaking between government stakeholders and non-government stakeholders. And we listen to needs, we listen for best practices, we listen for whom needs to be involved to drive these policy solutions forward. And then at the end of the dialogue process, we all get together in an interactive and engaging design process to come up with policy recommendations that are based on consensus. So essentially, everyone that is there has given their input into developing these policy recommendations, and by and large thinks that they're a good idea to move forward. And then what happens, this is the point that I really wanted to make, is we know that the stakeholders that I mentioned read these reports and they take them and put them to good use. And just over a month ago, I was very delighted to read the White House fact sheet for the U.S.-ASEAN Special Leaders Summit to discover that many of the policy recommendations that non-government stakeholders and government stakeholders at our previous dialogues came up with were very evident in the fact sheet of new programming and approaches for the U.S. government in the Mekong. So this is how it works. And it just shows the importance of an inclusive dialogue, of a multi-stakeholder process that, again, involves people from the region, non-government and government stakeholders getting together to drive change. So with that, I'm going to move to introduce our panelists. We've got a great panel for you representing each of the sub-themes of our past dialogue. First, we're going to hear from Stephanie Fisher, who represents our Transportation and Commerce sub-theme. She's the Technology Policy Analyst at the U.S. Department of Transportation, Bulk Transportation Systems Center. And Stephanie, over to you for a 6-minute presentation, and then I'll introduce our next speaker. Thank you.
Great. Good morning and good evening, everyone. Thank you, Brian, for that introduction. And thank you very much to the entire Stimson team for providing a forum for these important discussions. My name is Stephanie Fisher, and I'm a senior policy analyst at the U.S. Department of Transportation's Volpe Center. My colleagues and I have had the opportunity to participate in the previous Track 1.5 dialogue events, and I'm so pleased to have the opportunity to speak here again today with such a distinguished set of panelists. I'm really looking forward to today's discussion on connectivity in all of its forms and how we can best continue our collaboration to ensure that the benefits of an increasingly interconnected world are distributed efficiently and equitably. During our panel session in March, we had the opportunity to hear from national, regional, and international experts on the policy, regulatory, institutional, and technical reforms needed to promote economic connectivity by facilitating the safe movement of people and goods across borders. And this is a challenge that we all know was really brought to the forefront during the COVID-19 pandemic. The presentations during this panel highlighted several key themes, including the disproportionate impact of supply chain disruptions on different populations, the challenges resulting from having limited funds available for infrastructure development, and the inequitable distribution of trade benefits. At the U.S. Department of Transportation, we are very keenly aware of these challenges, both domestically and globally, and we work to develop the fundamental planning and regulatory frameworks needed to promote and facilitate cross-border transport and trade. As we conduct this work, we are really always guided by our key priorities in the areas of climate resilience, equity, safety, and good governance. Including these priorities throughout the entire infrastructure lifecycle, from planning and procurement through to design and construction and all the way to operation and maintenance, is critical to ensure that connectivity, whether it be physical, economic, or human, is advanced in a way that protects the most vulnerable citizens, preserves the environment, and enables sustainable growth for generations to come. USDOT is engaged in many connectivity projects across the globe, but today I'd like to just quickly highlight a current initiative that we're working on in partnership with the State Department and the Mekong-U.S. partnership. And this project is focused on promoting and expanding intra-regional and east-west connectivity throughout the Mekong River Delta. The initiative's purpose is to advance regional connectivity by developing and implementing a technical assistance and capacity building program that aligns corridor planning activities with internationally recognized best practices. These technical assistance and capacity building efforts will focus on shared goals, including enhancing multimodal connectivity, incorporating gender, social inclusion, and equity considerations into decision-making processes, reducing transport sector related greenhouse gas emissions, and improving infrastructure resiliency to flooding and other extreme weather events, and developing robust and transparent governance structures. We believe that focusing support on transportation planning processes rather than one-off infrastructure projects will lead to more sustainable regional partnerships and a strong foundation for future economic connectivity initiatives. This work that we're doing will consist of 4 phases. The first phase evaluated existing east-west economic corridors to identify those most likely to benefit from additional technical assistance and capacity building efforts. These potential corridors were evaluated based on their alignment with transportation planning best practices, their relevance to regional connectivity, and their overall completion status. This effort resulted in a report that assesses the planning processes for each priority corridor and identifies several cross-cutting findings to guide future engagement. This report is now publicly available on the Mekong-U.S. partnership website, and I'll go ahead and put the report link in the chat later so you can take a closer look if you're interested. The second phase of the project included outreach to relevant stakeholders, including U.S. embassies, foreign governments, and multilateral organizations. These discussions helped build support for the project, identified key regional contacts, and resulted in a better understanding of regional needs and opportunities. The third phase, which is now currently in progress, consists of a gap analysis to identify the technical, regulatory, institutional, and other shortfalls that could hinder technical assistance and capacity building work. As part of this work, the team is interviewing stakeholders who oversee or implement corridor development activities to help identify the most promising opportunities for future engagement. Finally, the fourth and final phase of the project will focus on the implementation of a targeted technical assistance program in the Mekong region. This program will include activities such as workshops, webinars, or peer exchange events to address key challenges related to transportation planning elements identified in the prior phases of the work. I'm really looking forward to hearing from our remaining speakers about how our infrastructure and economic connectivity efforts can both benefit from and leverage other forms of connectivity. And I'd be happy to answer any questions following the conclusion of the presentations. And with that, I'll pass it back to Brian to introduce our next speaker.
Thank you, Stephanie. It's great to see U.S. Department of Transportation really, digging into these connectivity issues that are present in the region. And we would love to extend an invitation to Secretary Buttigieg to give us his feel on connectivity in the Mekong at one of our future conferences, and look forward to that opportunity. Thanks again. Now we're going to move to a speaker who really represents one of the core values of our dialogue process, and that is multi-stakeholder processes. So we're going to hear from Agus Nugroho, who is the program manager and SumerNet coordinator at the Stockholm Environment Institute in Asia. And if you're not familiar with what SumerNet is, it's the Sustainable Mekong Research Network, and it takes key and active non-government stakeholders at the civil society level and the community level to have an ongoing conversation about finding solutions to development and environmental issues within the Mekong. It reaches across all of the lower Mekong and is one of the most effective examples of multi-stakeholder processes. And so we've invited Agus to talk about the people-to-people connections and the importance of these multi-stakeholder processes. Agus, over to you.
Thank you, Brian. And hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. So maybe just give me a sec to share my presentation. So you can all see my screen. So, okay. So good morning, good evening, everyone. So I'll be focusing on human connectivity, which include people-to-people connections and multi-stakeholder engagement for sustainable development in the Mekong. So I'm Agus Nugroho, as Brian introduced, program manager of the Sustainable Mekong Research Network, or SumerNet. We are hosted at the Stockholm Environment Institute as the secretariat. So we will share you about our takeaways during the last policy dialogue on connectivity, which was held in March. And we think that there was a very lively discussion, very fruitful discussion that we participated. And we think that this building connection among people and engaging with multi-stakeholders is very important, because it kind of ensure long-term and grounded impacts, because we engage with many stakeholders and get different perspectives and get also real issues on the ground. So by engaging with multi-stakeholders, I think we can ensure more sustainable impacts. We can also enhance inclusiveness, especially when we reach out to those underprivileged, marginalized communities on the ground through our programs. We also promote mutual understandings among different stakeholders, private sector, governments, and CSOs, civil society. And also we can address transboundary issues, which is quite common in our region in the Mekong, to find these transboundary issues. And then during the last human connectivity dialogue that we had under the Mekong-U.S. partnership, we had very good conversations among experts from regional and international experts, and also practitioners who has a very grounded experience in the Mekong on successes and challenges in collaborative efforts between government and civil society stakeholders. Secondly, we also discuss about best practices from the engagement of the programs or projects on the ground. And from this session, we were able to kind of draw key issues and recommendations that we derived from the discussions. There were 3 issues highlighted and a number of policy recommendations to address those issues. The first issue is the transboundary issue require cross-border collaboration, but the civil society have only limited resources and local reach. So we recommend that more resources should be available to facilitate connection, exchanges, and networking among CSO in the region, as well as also maybe if there is already best practice or existing regional CSO networks, that we can replicate those networks. Secondly, we recommend to utilize regional and think tank networks such as SAMANET, Sustainable Mekong Research Network, to provide opportunities for locally based policy stakeholders, including CSO, to connect and network, not only among themselves, but also among with different stakeholders, other kind of stakeholders, such as academic communities, researchers, policymakers, or regional bodies like MRC. The second issue that we highlighted during the conversation was the lack of meaningful participation by non-government stakeholders in policy decision-making process. For this, we recommend that we need to have more effort to include and encourage participation of governments in the and private sectors in the CSO-led fora. Establish lower Mekong Basin NGO forums that is discussing really more regional relevant issues, and that regional governments are starting to kind of include the civil society into the policy decision process through maybe public consultation, more institutionalized public consultation process within the policy processes. The third issue that we highlighted during the discussion last time was also the lack of linkages, engagement between civil society and academic research community, as well as other policy stakeholders. So for this issue, we recommend to encourage more research projects to co-design, to co-work, co-produce knowledge with policy stakeholders, including governments and policy influencers such as civil society. The second recommendation that there is a need for more support for localization of research and policy material resources. So, for example, it can be as simply as translating the policy brief into local languages in the Mekong, so it can be taken up easily and less effort by the government or by other policy stakeholders. The third recommendation that we had was more facilitation of interaction among CSOs and research academic communities and governments. However, we think that it needs to be there needs to be increased awareness first on the necessity of or the importance to interact among each other. The fourth recommendation that we had to address this issue is to develop regional shared standards to facilitate interaction among these different stakeholders. For example, the same kind of a perspective on governance, public engagement, citizen science, knowledge co-production, ethics, and other types of standards that we need to engage with each other. I would like to share more that what we did in Summernet, what we have done in Summernet in terms of engagement. So Brian has already mentioned that we are actually a regional research network, but engaging with the other policy stakeholders as well to kind of make impact of our science. So the first thing that we have been doing is we introduced the concept of boundary partner for in all our research projects. The boundary partner is that the researcher needs to identify their counterpart, which can then achieve policy impact through their research. We encourage all those researchers to engage with boundary partners as early as possible and to use knowledge co-production approach. We facilitate and convene regional forums on research and policy. And in the future, we are going towards positioning Summernet as a regional think and do tank network. So this means that we are going to engage with the next generation of policymakers, the next generation of researchers and practitioners. So basically engaging more with the young professionals. So, and in doing this, we need also partnership with other actors in this region. And I'm happy that previous speakers also mentioned that there are some support to the young professional and young researchers. So I think I'm quite optimistic of the future, and I hope for more fruitful collaboration in the Mekong. Thank you.
Thank you, Agus. And I was paying close attention and just thinking about how some of these approaches will be very useful for Stimson's own work in the region, as we make it our priority to listen first to communities and stakeholders on the ground, and then translate needs up to the policy level. I think that's one of the major methods that we've used to achieve success. But you know, what you're talking about is kind of the connectivity within that process on bringing in a more accurate set of needs and solutions to the table. So thank you for your presentation. Now we're going to turn to someone who inspired me during a panel that I facilitated on the digital sub-theme at our conference a few months ago. And this is Yen Nong Ok, who is the CEO of TB Myanmar. And he's going to talk to us about digital connectivity and data transparency and literacy needs. I mean, we had this great conversation about right to information. You know, when information is published or is available, it's not always accessible by all relevant stakeholders. Yet we know that if all relevant stakeholders have access to information, often solutions to problems can come forward more quickly, risk is reduced, and there's a better stream of benefits that are delivered to those who are involved with an issue or a project. At the same time, we talked about ethics around data and digital issues in the region and globally. And again, like I said, Yen Nong Ok inspired me to think about new ways to approach the ideas of ethics and data transparency and information access. So I hope that he imparts some of this wisdom with us today. Yen Nong, over to you.
Thank you, Brian. And thank you, everyone, for inviting me to be on this panel. And the Stimson Center for arranging both the dialogue back in March and the series of dialogues that you guys are arranging. And I'm really honored to be among this esteemed panel. And unfortunately, we have been talking a lot about very positive things, but I have to apologize in advance because I might be bringing forth some challenges that we are seeing in this space as well. So let me just go forth and share my slides. Is everyone able to see? It looks like. Looks like it's good. Yeah, so I'll be talking mostly about the issues of digital connectivity and focusing into one particular issue that I have been working on with a lot of folks in civil society, in independent media, in my home country of Myanmar, but also in the Mekong countries and more broadly in Southeast Asia as well. And this issue is about open data. So when we talk about digital connectivity, I like to think of open data as the essential lubricant that makes connectivity into something that's equitable, right? So open data is data that's publicly available, that's produced by either government organizations or public institutions, private institutions. It's data that doesn't have any barriers to entry in terms of being able to be used by stakeholders. My name is Jan, and I work, I'm the founder of a data and design consultancy called cont'd, where our team is mostly from Myanmar, but we're based remotely across Southeast Asia. And for the past almost 10 years, I've been working with civil society and independent media in the region as the partners for them to be able to utilize data and technology to make their work make the reach of their work more broad and be able to interconnect with each other as well. So when we're talking about open data as an issue, I would like to think that about 10 years ago, we had a very kind of naive view as a discipline, as a field of practitioners in international development. We really thought that with opening up of data and the transparency that comes with it, that will lead to accountability from public institutions. So the theory went like this. So we open up the data, we get the technologists to work with government institutions, NGOs, etc., to make the data easily accessible. You go to a website, you download the data, bam, it's in your computer and you start using it, right? And the assumption was that once we open up the data, the public will use that data, they will understand it, and they will use that data to demand accountability with evidence, right? They want institutions to reform. And the institutions then, in theory, will be able to respond to the public's demand because they're confronted with the evidence, right? So it's indisputable, the data is there. Most of the time, the data is published by the institutions themselves. So how can they not take this to heart, right? Or at least that was the theory that we were kind of playing with, we were kind of going with. But in practice, what tends to happen is that there's a lot of ways in which those three linkages don't actually match up, right? So I'd like to think of this analogy as, if you think there's a through line going from transparency to accountability, that's kind of like thinking, okay, at the beginning of the year, I'm going to buy a gym membership, right? And just buying that gym membership in and of itself is going to lead me to adopting a healthy lifestyle, which it might, right? It might, but there's a lot of things that has to happen in my life in terms of the decisions I make and the practices I put into effect before I actually go from a gym membership to a healthy lifestyle. So what kind of goes wrong? What are the linkages that get broken here? There are lots of challenges, but I would like to highlight three that I think are quite challenging, quite the big elephants in the room, if you may. Right. So first of all, the assumption that the public, when they're shown facts and figures and indisputable things that should get them to rationally think, rethink hidden assumptions that they have, or make them demand accountability from the public institutions. That kind of, the stumbling block there is that most of the time people are motivated more by feelings and emotions rather than facts, right? I have these little two clips from very unfortunate circumstances from recent history, right? One from the little boy from Syria, the second from Ukraine, the little girl who sang in the bunker. the song from the Disney from Frozen, right? And we are drawn to these things because that's the thing that speaks to our heart, right? That's the thing that captures our empathy, right? And just like these images capture our empathy, the things that incite hatred or cause us to feel remorse for mistakes from the past, right, all come from the heart, right? To put it kind of in wishy-washy terms, if you may, because for a lot of people, just showing them facts will not really cause them to change their minds. So when I work with civil society, when I work with journalists, I really over and over again come across this situation where we have all the data to prove a certain thing, but if it's not presented in a compelling way that captures people's feelings, it doesn't really lead to people pushing for change, right? So let's say you have managed to capture the public's attention with the right kinds of messaging, right? Getting institutions, either public institutions or even kind of large private institutions, for example, the internet giants, which are, in this day and age, very important for connectivity to be equitable, they take a long time to reform, even if their hearts are in the right place, just from the fact that they're used to doing things a certain way, and there are lots of incentives within these organizations to kind of keep going in the way that they're operating, right? So that's one other big challenge. And just to get on to the next, and which is probably the biggest challenge, I think, is that let's say you've convinced, as civil society, as independent media, you've convinced the public, you've gotten the ball rolling on reforming public institutions, right? All of these things, it's so much easier for them to backslide than for the reforms to keep working and keep continuing. The graph I have here is from the data set called the Global State of Democracy Index. And what it shows is how many countries have kind of moved towards democracy and away from democracy in the past decade. And as you can see, in the earlier parts of the decade, there are many more countries that have moved towards democracy, including my own. Whereas in the second half of the same decade, many countries have moved away from democracy, including my own. And so that really presents a challenge when everything civil society works for that takes a long time to build up can be reversed in a very short span of time. So given all of this, how do we kind of take away, what is the takeaway in terms of what can civil society keep doing? What can civil society do in collaboration with think tanks, in collaboration with media, in collaboration with the government, the private sector? And what I have come to realize is that connectivity is the main thing that we have to rely on, right? So today, we live in a world where civil society doesn't have to be siloed in one country. I can collaborate with an open data organization in Malaysia to write about an issue in Vietnam with a Vietnamese journalist, and then have that published in a newsroom in Taiwan, right? All those kinds of connections are possible, and they're happening, right? And all of these things, I really like what August said earlier about having to help civil society work together with the government and making sure the CSO-led agendas are connected with all these other things, especially local civil society, right? Who understands the context, who have skin in the game about the countries that they're in, the communities that they're in, and they are rooted in the places that they serve. And so I'm sorry that this is a lot of challenges, but I think as my co-panelists are also talking about, there are also a lot of positive things that are happening in the region. And I really look forward to our conversation afterwards in terms of how we might be addressing these challenges. Thank you. Over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Yan. And I think you can all see that One, like I said, Yen provides a very inspirational, thought-provoking approach to these issues, and it kind of, two, gives you insight into the nature of the discussions that we have during the Track 1.5 policy dialogues. If you would like to ask questions to Yen or to Agus or to Stephanie or to our next speaker, Natalie Chabot, please feel free to ask them in the Q&A box. And I see that our keynote speakers are still on as well. While we haven't intimated to them that they will be included in the discussion, if you do have questions for them, please ask and we can pass them along. Our next speaker is Natalie Chabot from the WWF, and she represents, like I said, we've been talking a little bit about inspiration and aspirational ideal states and goals for the region, and not just the region, but the world. She represents a program that really sets an ideal state in the discourse for free-flowing rivers at the WWF. And what her program does is not just explores the importance of keeping rivers free-flowing, but really demonstrates the economic and societal benefits of free-flowing rivers and preserving the flows, the things that move through rivers when they are free-flowing. And Natalie spoke on our panel for environmental connectivity, where we had two panels, one about land-based or fauna connectivity, and the other was water-based connectivity. Natalie, over to you. Thanks for joining us.
Hi, thank you so much, Brian, for that introduction. Let me just share my screen. So I'm Natalie Chabot from the World Wildlife Fund US, and I'm a program officer for our Free Flowing Rivers Initiative, which is a part of our freshwater team. And today I'll be talking a bit about free flowing rivers and how we've applied this model to determine river connectivity around the world and in the Mekong region. So free-flowing rivers have a lot of values, a lot of which of these are directly relevant to the Mekong. They're important for biodiversity. An obvious one may be they provide ecologically important habitats where vulnerable species can thrive and adapt to climate change, and particularly in mind, the Irrawaddy dolphin comes to mind. In the Mekong region. It's important for floodplain agriculture, which is an important livelihood and food source in parts of the world. And it requires naturally flowing rivers to seasonally to bring nutrients, sediment, and water. Particularly of importance to the Mekong is fish stocks. I think in the Mekong, it's estimated about 60 million people depend on the freshwater fisheries, and they require natural conditions such as seasonal flows and temperature changes in order to breed and thrive, the fish. It's really important for sediment transfer, the free-flowing rivers and connectivity, the balanced nutrients in soil, and they carry sediments downstream, including to deltas that can be impacted by rising sea levels. Free-flowing rivers are also important for recreation and cultural values. Like, as we know, a lot of free-flowing rivers or rivers in general are near important cultural sites like temples and other religious sites of gathering. Free-flowing rivers also provide healthy floodplains that can reduce the risks of floods and droughts, especially in a changing climate. What we consider free-flowing or rivers that are free-flowing is connectivity in 4 different ways. Longitudinally, which means connection between upstream and downstream. And so if a dam is built, let's just say there's no more upstream downstream connectivity, which is the easily thought about one. laterally, the ability to swell and shrink, rise and fall naturally. So that helps with floodplains, for example. Temporally, natural ability to change flows intermittently. And vertically, about ability to draw or contribute water to aquifers and atmosphere. And these are all really important for a river to maintain its natural abilities to provide all of these. So in 2019, with partners, WWF released a global methodology for determining river connectivity globally. And so we call it the Free Flowing Rivers Global Methodology. And this paper that was released in Nature showed the river connectivity all over the world. And it was really interesting because you could see here the largest rivers, which are the darkest colors, in dark blue and dark red, show that there aren't very many long free-flowing rivers left in the world. They're mostly in remote areas in the Arctic, and then in Africa and the Amazon. And this paper just highlighted the need to preserve these remaining long free-flowing rivers and what's at risk of losing these rivers. And in fact, in Southeast Asia, the Irrawaddy and Salween are the last two remaining long free-flowing rivers and the only tropical remaining free-flowing rivers. And I just wanted to show an example here from Myanmar that used this global methodology to look at the river connectivity in a more localized way. So we use the Free Flowing Rivers Global Methodology to and use updated data in order to have a better idea of river connectivity, since the global methodology uses global data sets that are quickly outdated and aren't as high resolution. And I wanted to show this example because it's in the general Mekong region and really highlighted some important current and future challenges with connectivity. So I'll walk through these three maps. So the map all the way on the left show all of the dams in Myanmar. The gray are existing dams. The orange are under construction dams, and red are planned or potential dams. Of course, the planned dams, it's highly unlikely that they would all be built, but you can see that both the Irrawaddy and Salween have planned dams on them. And if they were built, then they would no longer be free flowing and have all of those benefits as free flowing rivers. The center map shows the free flowing status just using the existing dams. So you can see that there are very few long free-flowing rivers left in Myanmar, notably the Irrawaddy and Salween. And then on the right-hand side, you could see what the rivers would look like if all of the dams were built, the existing construction and planned dams. And you can see virtually there's absolutely no free-flowing rivers, long free-flowing rivers left in Myanmar. So this model allows us to look at current, future scenarios and use this to create discussion and policy recommendations and really determine which infrastructure would impact connectivity. And now I wanted to talk about the example we're working on right now on the lower Mekong. So we're using this global river methodology to determine the river's connectivity status of the lower Mekong. And this project is funded through the U.S. aid Wonders of the Mekong, and many of you may be familiar with. And so as I showed the example from Myanmar, similar analysis will be done using localized data. And so working with local stakeholders and contacts in the area to get the updated data, including the Simpson database as well, which has been really helpful for this project. And so the results will show the connectivity status and bring awareness to the most potentially damaging planned dams. And it'll be shared with stakeholders in the Mekong region to get feedback and spark discussion. And this is planned to be finalized in the fall, and it'll be the report and results should be available to be shared with everyone. So I look forward to sharing that with you all. And that's all from my end. I'll pass it back to you, Brian.
Well, thank you very much, Natalie. So we have about 12 minutes left for a set of questions that are populating the Q&A box. Some of them are quite good. And we're not going to get through them all. I do want to answer one about new developments related to bridging gaps with Chinese stakeholders since the last Track 1.5 policy dialogue, and say that future policy dialogues will be inclusive of stakeholders from all Mekong countries, or at least there will be invited participants from all Mekong countries to future policy dialogues. And second, there's a question about environmental journalism. So Jan, I'm going to turn this over to you about how TB handles environmental journalist written articles in terms of supervision and review and transparency, because I think you've got a great model for producing some very impactful written articles and outputs with your work.
Thanks, Brian. So we routinely collaborate with journalists around the Mekong region, and we do focus on a lot of environmental stories. And one project that we'd like to highlight is we work with the Stimson Center and the Earth Journalism Network over the last year to work with journalists in the Mekong region to report on infrastructure and how that intersects with environmental issues in the region. And we were able to get journalists from all 5 of the Mekong countries, lower Mekong countries, and we were able to get really good collaborations, actually. For example, there were journalists from Laos and journalists from Thailand, both writing about issues around hydroelectricity coming from dams along the Mekong River in the places that, that where the river borders both those countries. I think there hadn't been any kind of data journalism about these issues coming out of, for example, newsrooms in Laos before. And we were able to both use really good open data, for example, produced by the Mekong Infrastructure Tracker that the Stimson Center has built, and other very good civil society-led open data sources such as Open Develop Mekong, which have been in operation for the last 10 years, producing open data about all these countries in the region, and also from global data sources. For example, nowadays there's a lot of satellite imagery available. So for example, we were able to track deforestation through portals, data available from portals like Global Forest Watch. And us as the technical team who are able to assist the journalists in working with the data, taking the data, and not just helping with the technical aspects of analyzing the data, but creating visualizations, creating story structures that allow them to explain the data, explain the insights from the data to their audience in compelling ways. And one success story, I'd say, is there was a story written by a Vietnamese journalist about sand mining in the lower parts of the Mekong River. And that story really got attention from the Vietnamese government, and the Deputy Prime Minister of Vietnam even mentioned his story, and they're taking into account like potential reforms that will be taking place. So we're very delighted that we were able to contribute, and we would definitely like to be doing more of these kinds of stories and collaborations with journalists across the region.
Thank you, Jan. Here comes a question for both Stephanie and Natalie to think about. And I asked you to think through your own lenses of your work to prepare an answer. And that's about economic relief or risk reduction in the region, and what your respective programs are doing to help the region recover from COVID. Or Natalie, for you, how does a free-flowing river provide support and relief during these difficult times? So Stephanie, first from you.
Sure. I think, we're all really aware of the importance of having well-functioning regional corridors in terms of, enhancing trade and enhancing the connectivity of people across borders. And we know that infrastructure funding and investment was a key challenge during COVID as resources were diverted to more pressing causes. So I think our goal is really to help kind of rebuild the fundamentals in terms of transportation planning and trade facilitation in the region, and to ensure, as was really highlighted in Agusa's presentation, that we're working with civil society organizations and other sometimes marginalized communities that aren't always included in those decision-making processes to ensure that as trade does pick back up and as supply chains reopen, that we're able to make sure that those benefits are equitably distributed and they're, taking into account the perspectives of all of the populations who are impacted by those different corridors and those infrastructure projects.
Thank you, Stephanie. Natalie, any thoughts?
Sure, yeah. In terms of free-flowing rivers, to mind comes the economic side of things and their impact. And I think the fisheries speak a lot to, the food, the money, and the livelihoods for people in the Mekong region. So, without all of those, especially in the Delta region as well, I think it just adds more stress to the stress that COVID has already added to the system.
Yeah, and we've observed kind of a double whammy or multiple sets of whammies, if you will, that are happening in Cambodia along the Tonle Sap Lake. As a lack of rainfall and climate issues have brought on these wet season droughts over the last 3 years, dams cut off connectivity of the river and prevent fish migration, prevent the natural flow, the flood pulse of the Mekong from happening. So while people are struggling with the economic situation introduced by COVID, their fisheries are also being depleted by these impacts. And keeping rivers free flowing can continue to provide that kind of bounty, the natural bounty of resources to those who rely on those resources from the river. Thank you. Question for any of you. This one is about civil society networks. It came from a question about the Mekong People's Council, which is a Thai-based network of civil society groups and communities in Thailand, which includes academic consortium and a journalist network. So the question is about models. Do we see a proliferation of civil society network models happening and connecting throughout the region? What are the benefits? What are kind of drawbacks of perhaps too many? Is that a problem? And then also attempts to link them together. Is this a good thing or something that can be, we should just allow networks to develop and not have any objectives to provide broad linkages. August, first to you, and I see Yen, you're shaking your head. You probably have some thoughts on that too. August, to you.
Yeah, I think as I mentioned also in the answer that one of our research projects is actually identifying the Mekong People Forum. I don't know whether that's, I don't think that's the same forum, but it's kind of a similar networks or forum for engaging with the multiple stakeholders, civil society, academic communities, also the journalists and other stakeholders. And our researchers said that, mentioned in their reports, when they report to us, that forum has been very useful to facilitate conversations, to facilitate the voice actually from the communities to engage with the conversation. In this case, it's related to the hydropower development in the Mekong. And what I take from their experience is that by adding more information, scientific information, or more informed from the empirical information can strengthen their voice, the voice of the community as well. And for the other stakeholders, like for example, private sector and government, they can see it more more, in the more positive way in terms of this kind of a scientific or more evidence-based information, rather than just just a complaint, I mean, just the opinion from the community. But if we kind of join together the the opinion of the community and the evidence-based knowledge, that would be, I think, work better for the conversation.
Thank you, Agus. Yeah, and quick answer from you.
Yeah, I think I come from the tech sector, and technologists don't like to do things that are bureaucratic. And so I think one of the things that I would say, just from my own experience networking and collaborating with civil society across the region, is that just organically, because these people are facing the same challenges, working on the same issues, they are already collaborating, especially in the digital spaces. And I think there's a lot to be said about the informal connections that happen when people are coming together during events, especially in person. So I'm really excited that the next event that you guys are holding will be in person, because a lot of the connections, a lot of the ideas flow outside of the panels, when people are getting coffee, when people are getting dinner after the events. And these bonds really last for a long time. So I'm all for informal connections.
Great. Now, our final question is going to go to one of our keynote speakers, to Das Pak. And it was the first question that was asked to us in the Q&A. It's about inflation in the region and globally. The question is, inflation is a major problem in the lower Mekong, and some countries have experienced fuel shortages and severe food price spikes. These countries have largely had no government stimulus during the COVID pandemic, and the poor suffer the most. How are U.S. policies responding to this? So we're coming back to the economic approach and considerations. Das Pak, comments from you, and this will be our last question and response for our event.
Well, thank you, Brian. And just before I just answer that question, so inspiring to hear from the speakers. Thanks for starting my morning with your inspirational research. On that question, Brian, track down some numbers for you. We have vaccine donations for Thailand, Cambodia, Vietnam, and Laos at 45,908,693. So almost 46 million vaccine doses. And in the period from January of 2021 to April of 2022, we have provided $59 million in state and USAID for emergency health, humanitarian, economic, infrastructure, and development assistance to combat COVID-19 in Mekong countries. And I want to just make sure and foot stomp that the Mekong and the Mekong-U.S. partnership is a key priority for the U.S. government, and we work very closely with our interagency partners to make sure that focus on the Mekong and all of the issues that our speakers talked about transportation connectivity, about water issues, about civil society and information, that we work across the board on all of those issues, and very much appreciate all of the questions and the panelists today. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Das Pak. And a big thanks to all of our panelists and keynote speakers for joining us today from all over the world. I think it really speaks to the power and the ability for the Mekong-U.S. partnership to drive change in what I think is the most important part of the Indo-Pacific, the Mekong region. The Stimson Center and IUCN, our partner on this Mekong-U.S. partnership track 1.5 policy dialogues, are grateful for your attendance, all of you who are calling in, the 70+ people. I have to apologize that we didn't get through all of the questions, but we will certainly give them a good look and send them to those who can answer them, and perhaps there are ways that those answers can be answered to you. Like I said, our next policy dialogue is going to happen in person in just about 6 weeks in Phnom Penh. We're going to be looking at human resource development through the lenses of education, labor, and health pandemic recovery. And we look forward to convening people in person in Phnom Penh and we'll produce another one of these summary reports and hold a similar launch. So hopefully you can tune in and join us then. Again, thanks to all for joining us today. Have a great day. Have a great evening. Thank you.